the sun-drenched streets of Promise Creek, Colorado fell silent as Zoe Halsey's voice rang out clear and strong across the town meeting. "I won't stand for it. These railroad men think they can just take whatever land they please without fair compensation to the families who've worked it for generations." It was 1876, and at 22 years old, Zoe had already earned a reputation throughout the growing settlement. Some called her Loudmouth Halsey behind her back. Others used less flattering terms. But no one could deny that when Zoe spoke, people listened even if most of them didn't like what they heard. Mayor Dunkley's face reddened as he banged his gavel. "Miss Halsey, this is the third time you've disrupted proceedings. I must insist you take your seat or leave the hall." Zoe stood her ground, honey-brown curls escaping from beneath her bonnet, green eyes flashing with determination. "When you address the concerns of the Wilkins family and their neighbors properly, I'll gladly take my seat, sir." Laughter rippled through the crowd. "Someone ought to find that girl a husband to keep her occupied," someone called out, triggering more laughter. From the back of the meeting hall, a tall figure watched with interest. Adam Irwin leaned against the wall, Stetson pulled low over his eyes, trail dust still clinging to his clothes after 3 weeks driving cattle. At 30, he'd seen enough of the world to recognize something rare when he saw it. "That'll be enough, Miss Halsey," the mayor said firmly. "This meeting is adjourned until next week." As the crowd dispersed, whispers followed Zoe like persistent shadows. She held her head high, though Adam could see the slight tremble in her hands as she gathered her belongings. "Shameful display," muttered Mrs. Prescott as she passed by Adam. "That girl needs to learn her place." "A woman with opinions," her husband agreed, shaking his head. "Nothing but trouble." Adam pushed himself away from the wall and followed Zoe outside, keeping a respectful distance. He watched as several young men from town made exaggerated bows as she passed. "Might we hear a speech on the moral implications of hat-wearing, Miss Halsey?" one called out, prompting laughter from his companions. Zoe didn't break stride. "Perhaps when you develop the capacity for listening, Mr. Collins?" Adam couldn't help but smile. He'd only been in Promise Creek for a day, having delivered a herd for his employer, but he was already finding reasons to extend his stay. The following morning found Adam at the general store, where the proprietor, Harold Jenkins, was happy to share the local gossip. "Zoe Halsey? Oh, she's been a firecracker since she was knee-high to a grasshopper," Jenkins explained while weighing coffee beans. "Her pa was a school teacher before he passed. Educated her like she was a boy philosophy, politics, you name it. Her poor mother couldn't rein her in, and now that both parents are gone, she lives with her aunt and helps run the millinery shop." "Seems she's not too popular around here," Adam observed, leaning against the counter. Jenkins snorted. "That's putting it mildly. Girl's got more education than sense. Turned down 3 marriage proposals already. Says she's waiting for a man who values her mind." He tapped his temple. "Meanwhile, she's stirring up trouble wherever she goes." "Standing up for what's right isn't trouble," Adam countered mildly. Jenkins gave him a shrewd look. "You'd be wise to steer clear, Mr. Irwin. Pretty face aside, that one's nothing but heartache for any man." Adam tipped his hat and left with his supplies, heading toward the millinery shop before he could think better of it. The bell above the door tinkled as he entered. The shop was empty except for Zoe, who was arranging a display of ladies' hats. She turned, clearly surprised to see a cowboy in her establishment. "Good morning," she said, professional but wary. "Can I help you find something for a lady friend, perhaps?" Adam removed his hat. "Actually, Miss Halsey, I wanted to introduce myself. Adam Irwin. I was at the town meeting yesterday." Her expression cooled. "Come to have a laugh at my expense, Mr. Irwin? You wouldn't be the first." "No, madam," he said simply. "I came to say I admired your courage, standing up for those families when no one else would." Suspicion gave way to surprise in her eyes. "You're either sincere or the most creative mocker I've encountered yet." Adam smiled. "I've been called many things, Miss Halsey, but creative is a new one." The hint of a smile touched her lips before she quashed it. "Well, Mr. Irwin, while I appreciate the sentiment, I have work to do, unless you're in the market for a bonnet." "Actually," he said, glancing around the shop, "I was wondering if you might know of any work available in town. My trail boss has moved on with the herd, but I've a mind to stay in Promise Creek a while longer." Zoe studied him for a moment, as if trying to decipher his true intentions. The Peterson Ranch outside town is always looking for experienced hands, and Mr. Buchanan at the livery might need help. But if you're looking to settle longer term, the Wilkins family, the very ones I was speaking about yesterday, could use help rebuilding their fence line before winter. I appreciate the information, Miss Halsey. He placed his hat back on his head. Perhaps I'll see you at the next town meeting. If you do, Mr. Irwin, be prepared for another shameful display, she replied, echoing Mrs. Prescott's words with perfect accuracy. Adam paused at the door. I'm counting on it. By the end of the week, Adam had secured work with the Wilkins family. Their struggling ranch lay directly in the path of the proposed railroad extension, and the company representatives had been applying increasing pressure on them to sell. Mr. Wilkins had a bad back from a fall the previous winter, and his wife and 2 young children couldn't manage all the work themselves. It was while repairing their north fence line that Adam spotted a familiar figure approaching on horseback. Zoe rode astride rather than side saddle, another convention she apparently had no use for. Miss Halsey, he called, tipping his hat as she drew near. Mr. Irwin, she acknowledged, reining in her horse. I see you took my suggestion. Best advice I've had in a while. He drove another fence post into the ground with powerful strikes of his mallet. The Wilkins are good people. Yes, they are. She dismounted, tying her horse to a post. I've brought some papers for Mrs. Wilkins to review, legal documents concerning the railroad's offers. Adam leaned on his mallet, studying her. You know much about the law, Miss Halsey? More than most in these parts, though that's a low bar to clear. She looked out over the Wilkins land. My father insisted I understand how the world worked, including its laws. Said knowledge was the only true defense a woman has in this world. Sounds like a wise man. He was. Her voice softened. He'd have fought this railroad battle himself if he were still here. They walked together toward the Wilkins' modest home. And your mother? Adam asked. Was she as forward-thinking as your father? A shadow crossed Zoe's face. My mother was gentle and kind. She worried what the world would do to a daughter who didn't conform. She wasn't wrong to worry. She looked at him directly. People can be cruel when faced with something they don't understand. Or something that threatens their comfortable way of seeing things, Adam added. Zoe tilted her head, reassessing him. You're a surprising man, Mr. Irwin. I've been places and seen things that make a woman with opinions seem like the least of life's complications, he replied. After the war, I headed west like many others. Found that most troubles come from people being too certain they know what's best for everyone else. Before Zoe could respond, Mrs. Wilkins emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. Miss Halsey, what a pleasant surprise. And I see you've met our salvation, Mr. Irwin. Come in, both of you. I've fresh lemonade cooling. Over the next few weeks, Adam established himself as an indispensable worker at the Wilkins Ranch. He also became a regular sight in town, frequently visiting the millinery shop under the pretense of bringing messages from Mrs. Wilkins. The truth, which both he and Zoe tacitly acknowledged without speaking of it, was that he enjoyed her company. You realize you're ruining your prospects in town by associating with me, Zoe said one afternoon as they walked from the shop to the post office. Mrs. Prescott told her sewing circle you must have taken a blow to the head during the war. Adam chuckled. My prospects were limited to begin with. Cowboys aren't exactly considered prime matrimonial material by ladies like Mrs. Prescott. At least cowboys are expected to be rough around the edges, Zoe replied. Women are expected to be smooth all over, with no sharp thoughts to prick the fragile male ego. They rounded a corner to find a crowd gathered outside the newspaper office. A notice had been posted, and people were reading it with animated discussions. What's happening? Zoe asked a young boy on the edge of the crowd. Railroad companies called a special meeting, the boy answered. They're offering to build a depot here if the town council approves their new route. Zoe pushed her way through to read the notice, Adam following in her wake. The announcement detailed a proposal that would bring the railroad directly through Promise Creek and directly through the properties of 5 families, including the Wilkins. This is outrageous, Zoe said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. They're bribing the town with promises of prosperity while stealing land from hard-working families. "Now, Miss Halsey," said Elias Turner, the banker, with a condescending smile, "nobody's stealing anything. The railroad's offering fair compensation." "Fair?" Zoe scoffed. "They've offered the Wilkins half the market value for land that's been in their family for generations." "Sometimes progress requires sacrifice," Turner replied smoothly. "Interesting how it's always the same people being asked to sacrifice," Adam interjected, standing beside Zoe. "While others profit." Turner's smile faltered. "Mr. Irwin, isn't it? You're new to our town. Perhaps you don't understand the opportunities this railroad connection would bring." "Oh, I understand opportunity just fine," Adam replied. "I also understand the difference between fair business and robbery dressed up as progress." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some nodded in agreement, others frowned at this challenge to authority. "The meeting's on Friday," Zoe said, scanning the notice again. "We need to organize the affected families to present a united front." Turner laughed. "Always ready with a speech, aren't you, Miss Halsey? Some things never change." "Thank God for that," Adam said firmly. "This town could use more people willing to speak uncomfortable truths." As they walked away, Zoe glanced at him. "You didn't have to do that." "Do what?" "Stand with me. Most men in this town would rather cut off their arm than publicly agree with loudmouth Halsey." Adam's expression grew serious. "I don't much care what most men would do, Miss Halsey. I care about what's right." For the next 3 days, Zoe and Adam worked tirelessly, visiting each of the affected families, helping them understand their rights, and encouraging them to attend the meeting. They drafted letters to the territorial governor and researched previous cases of railroad land acquisition. The evening before the meeting, Adam found Zoe still working at the back of the millinery shop, surrounded by papers, her aunt having long since gone home. "You need to rest," he said, setting a basket on the table. "Mrs. Wilkins sent supper." Zoe rubbed her tired eyes. "There's too much to do. If we can just find precedent for Zoe." It was the first time he had used her given name, and it stopped her mid-sentence. "You've done everything possible to prepare. Now you need to eat and rest." She looked up at him, vulnerability showing through her determined facade. What if it's not enough? What if they lose their homes anyway? Adam sat across from her, unpacking the basket. "Then we'll know we fought our hardest, but we're not beaten yet." As they shared the simple meal of fried chicken and biscuits, Zoe asked, "Why did you really stay in Promise Creek, Adam? A man with your skills could find work anywhere." He considered his answer carefully. "At first, I was just curious about the woman brave enough to stand alone against an entire town meeting. And then I got to know her." His eyes held hers. "And I realized I'd found something rare. A person who lives by their convictions instead of convenience." Zoe looked down at her plate. "Most men find my convictions inconvenient." "I'm not most men." The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken possibilities. Zoe broke the silence first. "It's getting late. Aunt Margaret will worry." Adam nodded, understanding her caution. "I'll walk you home." The meeting hall was packed to capacity the next evening. The railroad representatives sat at a table at the front, alongside Mayor Dunkley and the town council members. The affected families, including the Wilkins, occupied the front rows. Zoe sat with them, while Adam stood against the wall watching. The railroad's chief negotiator, a slick-talking man named Pearson, presented their proposal with grand flourishes about progress and prosperity. The depot would bring commerce, he promised. Property values would rise. Promise Creek would become a hub of activity rather than just another dusty western outpost. When he finished, Mayor Dunkley invited questions. Hands shot up throughout the room, but the mayor's eyes skipped over Zoe each time. After calling on several supporters of the plan, he finally, reluctantly, acknowledged her. Zoe stood, papers in hand. "Mr. Pearson, your company's offer to the affected landowners is significantly below market value. Furthermore, the documentation you provided contains several misrepresentations of both Colorado territorial law and federal statutes regarding eminent domain." Pearson's confident smile dimmed. "I assure you, Miss Halsey, Zoe Halsey. Miss Halsey, our legal team has thoroughly vetted these offers. They comply with all applicable laws." "Then your legal team is either incompetent or deliberately deceptive," Zoe replied, her voice steady despite the gasps her words elicited. According to the Pacific Railroad Act of 1862 and its amendments, fair compensation must reflect not only current value, but potential future value. Additionally, the Homestead Act self-explicitly protects certain properties from a forced acquisition, including the Wilkins farm, which was granted under that very act. She proceeded to outline, with precise citations, the legal vulnerabilities in the railroad's approach. The room fell silent as she spoke, even her usual detractors unable to dismiss the depth of her knowledge. When she finished, Pearson was visibly flustered. "These are complex legal matters that would need to be addressed by our attorneys." "Yes, they are," Zoe agreed. "And until they are properly addressed, I suggest the town council postpone any decision on this matter." A murmur of agreement rose from the affected families. Even some townspeople who had been enthusiastic about the railroad proposal looked uncertain now. Mayor Dunkley cleared his throat. "Perhaps Mr. Pearson would like to respond to these allegations." "They're not allegations, they're citations of existing law," came a voice from the back. All heads turned to see Adam stepping forward. "And Miss Halsey isn't alone in her concerns. I've worked with railroads before. I've seen towns promise the moon only to be left with whistle stops instead of depots, and families forced from land they'd worked for generations." "And who might you be, sir?" Pearson asked, his tone decidedly less friendly. "Adam Irwin. Just a cowboy who knows railroad men tend to promise with one hand while taking with the other." The meeting dissolved into heated debate. By the end, the council voted to postpone their decision, pending further legal review, a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. As people filed out, Adam made his way to Zoe, who was surrounded by grateful families. "You were magnificent," he said when they finally had a moment alone. "We both were," she replied, her cheeks flushed with triumph. "But this is just a delay. They'll be back with new tactics. And we'll be ready." He offered his arm. "May I walk you home, Miss Halsey?" She placed her hand on his arm, a simple gesture that somehow felt momentous. "Yes, Mr. Irwin, you may." The railroad did indeed return with new tactics. 2 weeks later, Pearson arrived with revised offers for the landowners still inadequate, but better than before. He also brought veiled threats about the railroad potentially bypassing Promise Creek altogether if the town proved hostile to progress. Through it all, Zoe and Adam worked side by side. Their alliance became a partnership, then a friendship, and gradually, something deeper that neither rushed to define. The town noticed, of course. Gossip flourished about loudmouth Halsey and her cowboy defender. "I heard he was educated back east before the war," Mrs. Jenkins told Mrs. Prescott at the general store, loud enough for Zoe to overhear as she shopped. "That would explain his peculiar taste in women." "More likely he's after her inheritance," Mrs. Prescott replied. "Her aunt owns that shop outright. And Zoe's her only family." Zoe had learned to let such comments roll off her back, but they still stung. Later that day, when Adam stopped by the shop, she recounted the exchange with forced lightness. "Apparently you're either too educated or too greedy to have genuine interest in me," she said, arranging ribbons in a display case. Adam leaned against the counter. "They really can't fathom that a man might admire a woman's mind." "It challenges their entire worldview," Zoe sighed. "Though I admit, sometimes I wonder myself what you see in my company. You've made few friends in town by associating with me." Adam reached across the counter and took her hand, a rare public gesture that made her breath catch. "Zoe, the only friendships worth having are with people who value honesty and courage. As for what I see in you..." His eyes held hers steadily. "I see the person I've been looking for, without knowing it." Before she could respond, the bell above the door jingled as customers entered. Adam released her hand and tipped his hat. "I'll see you at the Wilkins place tomorrow," he said, and was gone. That night, Zoe barely slept, his words echoing in her mind. The person I've been looking for, without knowing it. Could he truly mean it? Men had professed admiration before, even love, but always with the expectation that marriage would temper her outspokenness. Adam seemed to value the very qualities others found objectionable. The next day dawned bright and clear. Zoe arrived at the Wilkins farm to find Adam and Mr. Wilkins deep in discussion about crop rotation. Something had shifted between them. She felt it immediately when Adam looked up and saw her. They spent the morning helping Mrs. Wilkins preserve peaches from her orchard, working in comfortable companionship. After the midday meal, Adam suggested a ride to check the repaired fence line. They rode side by side across the rolling hills of the Wilkins property, the late summer sun warming their shoulders. When they reached a ridge overlooking a small valley where wildflowers still bloomed despite the advancing season, Adam suggested they stop to rest the horses. As they stood admiring the view, Adam spoke without preamble. "I've been offered a permanent position here, foreman for the Wilkins and 2 neighboring ranches. They're pooling resources to fight the railroad and need someone to manage their combined operations." Zoe turned to him, surprised. "That's wonderful news. Will you accept?" "I'm considering it." He looked at her directly. "But there are other considerations that weigh more heavily in my decision." Her heart beat faster. "Such as?" "Such as whether the woman I've come to love might consider a future with a man who started out as just a curious cowboy." The directness of his declaration took her breath away. "Adam, I know it's sudden," he continued. "Or perhaps not sudden at all, given how we've spent nearly every day together these past months. But I need you to know that I love you exactly as you are. Your mind, your voice, your courage. These are not qualities I would ever wish to change." Tears pricked at Zoe's eyes. Most men say such things before marriage, only to expect conformity afterward. "I'm not most men," he reminded her. "And I don't want a conventional wife. I want a partner, someone to build a life with, not someone to bend to my will." Zoe stepped closer to him. "I've been waiting for words like those my entire life. I never truly believed I would hear them." "Do you love me, Zoe?" His voice was steady, but she could see vulnerability in his eyes. "Yes," she answered simply. "Yes, I do. With a fullness I never imagined possible." His smile was like the breaking of dawn. Slowly he bent his head toward hers, giving her time to retreat if she wished. But Zoe closed the distance between them, their lips meeting in a kiss that felt like a promise, a beginning. When they parted, Adam kept her close in his embrace. "I should warn you," he said, "loving me won't make your life easier in this town. I have my own opinions that don't sit well with many." Zoe laughed. "We can be outcasts together then. Build our own community of the stubbornly principled." "Starting with the Wilkins and their neighbors," Adam agreed. "And perhaps, in time, our own family." They rode back to the Wilkins home, hand in hand, the future stretching before them like an unwritten story they would compose together. The battle with the railroad continued through the autumn and into winter. The case eventually attracted the attention of a Denver newspaper, which sent a reporter to cover the story of the small-town resistance. To everyone's surprise, the reporter was a woman, Frances Carter, one of the few female journalists in the territory. Frances was immediately drawn to Zoe, fascinated by her knowledge and determination. She wrote a compelling article that portrayed Zoe not as loudmouth Halsey, but as the voice of Promise Creek, a principled advocate for justice standing against corporate overreach. The article caught fire, reprinted in newspapers as far away as Chicago. Suddenly, the railroad found itself facing not just local resistance, but public scrutiny. Letters of support poured in for the affected families, and a prominent Denver attorney offered his services pro bono. By spring, the railroad conceded. They would reroute their line to skirt the disputed properties, still building a depot in Promise Creek, but without displacing the families who had fought so hard to keep their land. The town celebrated with a victory picnic on the Wilkins property. Even those who had mocked Zoe found themselves congratulating her, though some did so with tight smiles and grudging words. "Enjoy your moment, Miss Halsey," Mrs. Prescott said, her tone suggesting the enjoyment should be brief. "Though I wonder what cause you'll take up next to disrupt our peaceful town." "Actually," Adam interjected, his arm around Zoe's waist, "we'll be rather busy with wedding preparations, I expect." Mrs. Prescott's eyebrows shot up. "Wedding? You two are—" "Engaged as of last week," Zoe confirmed, unable to keep the happiness from her voice. "We wanted to wait until the railroad matter was settled to make our announcement." News of their engagement spread quickly through the gathering. Reactions were mixed genuine congratulations from their allies, thinly veiled disapproval from others, and frank curiosity from most. Francis Carter, who had returned to cover the railroad's concession, was delighted. A love story amidst a fight for justice? My readers will be enthralled, she declared. Would you consider letting me write about your unusual courtship? Zoe looked to Adam, who shrugged with a smile. Our story might encourage other women to speak their minds, he said, and other men to listen. Then yes, Zoe told Francis, but only if you promise to tell it truthfully, both the harsh realities and the joy we've found despite them. Adam and Zoe were married on a perfect June day in 1877, beneath an arch of wildflowers on a hilltop overlooking the Wilkins farm. The ceremony was small but meaningful, attended by those who had supported them through their fight with the railroad, and a few whose minds had gradually opened to new possibilities. Francis's article about their romance appeared in newspapers across the country, inspiring letters from women who saw themselves in Zoe's struggle to be heard and valued for her mind. Some of these women even made the journey to Promise Creek to meet her, forming the nucleus of what would eventually become the Promise Creek Women's Society, a group dedicated to education, suffrage, and social reform. Adam accepted the position as foreman for the Allied ranches, which prospered under his management. He and Zoe built a home of their own on a beautiful piece of land gifted to them by the Wilkins family out of gratitude for their help in the railroad fight. Their home quickly became known as a place of lively discussion and warm hospitality. Adam built a large dining table that could seat 20, and it was often full for Sunday dinners, where ranchers, merchants, and even the occasional passing traveler would engage in spirited debate about everything from cattle prices to women's rights. "You've created quite a salon here in the wilderness," Francis remarked during one of her visits, a year after the wedding. She had become a frequent correspondent and occasional guest. Who would have thought Promise Creek would become a center of progressive thought in Colorado territory? It's still a work in progress, Zoe admitted, watching Adam across the room as he discussed irrigation techniques with Mr. Wilkins. There are plenty in town who still cross the street to avoid speaking to loudmouth Halsey and her peculiar husband. But there are more who don't, Francis pointed out. I've seen the change in just my few visits. People are listening to you now. To us, Zoe corrected. Adam has given my voice amplification and context. He built this place, this gathering, specifically so ideas could flow freely. Later that night, as they prepared for bed, Zoe shared Francis's observation with Adam. She says you built a platform for my voice, she told him, brushing out her long hair. I think she's right. You didn't try to silence me like others did. Instead, you created spaces where speaking freely was valued. Adam sat on the edge of their bed, watching her with undisguised adoration. Your voice was already powerful, Zoe. I just recognized its worth when others couldn't see past convention. She set down her brush and moved to stand between his knees, her hands cradling his face. Do you know how extraordinary that is? Most men of our time would rather die than admit their wife might have something valuable to say. He pulled her closer. Most men are fools then. I'd rather have your mind challenging me every day than a docile agreement that teaches me nothing. Even when I argue with you in public? She asked with a smile. Especially then, he laughed. Your passion is glorious to behold. She kissed him then, with all the passion he admired. I love you, Adam Irwin, for seeing me when others wouldn't look, for hearing me when others wouldn't listen. And I love you, Zoe Irwin, for being brave enough to be exactly who you are in a world that demanded otherwise. As winter settled over Promise Creek that year, bringing with it quiet evenings by the fire and planning for spring planting, Zoe discovered she was expecting their first child. The news filled their home with a new kind of joy, a looking forward to expanded horizons. What do you think of Elizabeth for a girl? Adam asked one evening as they sat together, his hand resting on her still flat stomach. After your mother? It's perfect, Zoe agreed. And for a boy? Michael, after my father, Adam suggested. Though with our luck, any child of ours will be talking in complete sentences before they can walk, regardless of the name we choose. Zoe laughed, and arguing philosophical points by age 5. I wouldn't have it any other way, Adam said softly. News of Zoe's pregnancy spread through town with the usual mix of reactions. But There were noticeably more genuine congratulations than there might have been a year earlier. The Women's Society members were particularly thrilled, already planning a quilt-making gathering and discussing how they would ensure the child had access to the finest education possible. "You've changed this town," Adam observed one day as they walked home from church, where even Reverend Walsh had offered sincere blessings for their growing family. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, but undeniably. "We've changed it," Zoe corrected him. "Your support gave my words weight they wouldn't have had otherwise." "Perhaps," Adam acknowledged, "but it was your courage that started everything. That day in the town meeting, when you stood up for the Wilkins, that was the moment Promise Creek began to transform, whether it knew it or not." As her pregnancy progressed, Zoe maintained her involvement in community matters, though she delegated more responsibilities to other Women's Society members. Her Aunt Margaret, now fully reconciled to her niece's unconventional life, took greater control of the millinery shop. In July of 1878, Elizabeth Margaret Irwin entered the world after a difficult but ultimately successful birth. She had her father's dark hair and her mother's determined green eyes. "She's perfect," Adam whispered, cradling his daughter with tears in his eyes. "She's loud," Zoe observed with tired humor as the baby's strong cries filled the room. "Clearly taking after her mother already." Dr. Reynolds, who had attended the birth, chuckled. "Strong lungs are a good sign, and with parents like you two, she'll certainly need them." The first months of Elizabeth's life coincided with significant changes in Promise Creek. The railroad depot was finally completed, bringing new commerce and travelers. Among them was a young lawyer named Thomas Grant, who set up practice in town and quickly aligned himself with Zoe and Adam's progressive views. With Thomas's legal expertise, the Women's Society began advocating for a proper school in Promise Creek. The existing one-room schoolhouse was overcrowded and understaffed, with education for girls often considered optional beyond the basics. "Every child deserves the chance to develop their mind fully," Zoe argued at a town council meeting. 6-month-old Elizabeth sleeping peacefully in Adam's arms beside her, including, perhaps especially our daughters. The debate was heated but less dismissive than such discussions had been in the past. Zoe was no longer easily written off as a troublemaking spinster. As a wife, mother, and recognized force in the community's recent victory against the railroad, her words carried weight they never had before. By Elizabeth's first birthday, ground had been broken for a new school building, with plans for separate classrooms by age group, and a commitment to equal education for boys and girls. "You should be the head mistress," Adam suggested, as they watched the construction from across the street, Elizabeth toddling between them, her tiny hands held in theirs. "You have more education than anyone in town, except perhaps Reverend Walsh." Zoe looked startled. "Me? Run a school? Why not? You've already been teaching informally at our Sunday gatherings. The women in your society look to you for guidance. You have a gift for explaining complex ideas clearly." The seed he planted took root quickly. By the time the school was completed in the spring of 1880, Zoe had formulated a comprehensive plan for curriculum and instruction that impressed even the most conservative members of the town council. Her appointment as headmistress was not without controversy, but the opposition was muted compared to what it might have been just a few years earlier. Promise Creek had grown accustomed to Zoe's voice being part of important conversations, and results had proven the value of her contributions. The school opened with 48 students ranging from 6 to 16 years old. Zoe hired 2 additional teachers, Frances Carter's younger sister Ruth, who had training from a women's college back east, and James Wilson, a former Union Army officer with a background in mathematics and science. "I never imagined this," Zoe confessed to Adam on the evening after the first day of classes. Elizabeth, now a precocious 2-year-old, was already asleep upstairs. "When I stood up at that town meeting 4 years ago, I was just trying to help the Wilkins keep their land. I never envisioned all of this." Adam pulled her close on the porch swing they often shared in the evenings. "That's how change works, I think. One person speaks truth, then another joins them, then another. Before you know it, you've built something meaningful without fully intending to." "Like us," Zoe said softly. "We didn't set out to challenge how marriages work in places like Promise Creek. We just followed our hearts. And our minds," Adam added with a smile. Don't forget those, particularly yours, which I still find more attractive than any other quality a woman could possess. Flatterer, she teased, but leaned into him contentedly. The school flourished under Zoe's direction. Students who had previously shown little interest in learning discovered subjects that captivated them. Girls who had been told their education didn't matter, beyond basic literacy, found themselves encouraged to pursue knowledge as deeply as their brothers. When Michael Adam Irwin joined the family in 1881, Zoe temporarily reduced her role at the school, with Ruth Carter stepping up as acting headmistress. But even during this period, their home remained a center of community engagement and intellectual discussion. "You've created something remarkable here," Thomas Grant observed during one Sunday gathering. As children played in the yard, and adults debated the merits of various approaches to territorial governance. A microcosm of what society could be if we valued ideas over conventions. "It's still imperfect," Adam acknowledged. "We face opposition regularly." "But less than before," Thomas pointed out. "And your children will grow up in a community that, while not fully transformed, has at least made space for different voices." As if to prove his point, Elizabeth, not quite 4 years old, marched up to the adults with a serious expression. "Papa, Mama, I have a question about justice," she announced, causing the gathered company to laugh gently at her precocious formality. "What is your question, sweetheart?" Zoe asked, lifting the child onto her lap. "If Tommy says the blue ribbon is his, but I found it first by the creek, whose ribbon is it truly?" Her small face was a study in earnest inquiry. Adam and Zoe exchanged amused glances. "That's quite a philosophical question about property rights," Adam said, matching his daughter's seriousness. "What do you think, Counselor Grant? How would the law view this dispute?" Thomas entered into the discussion with good humor, explaining concepts of finding and ownership to the attentive child. Other adults joined in, offering perspectives and examples, treating Elizabeth's question with the same respect they would give an adult's inquiry. "This is why I love your gatherings," Frances Carter said later, as she helped Zoe clear dishes. She had returned to Promise Creek to visit her sister and was staying with the Irwins. That child asked a question that would have earned her a dismissal in most homes. And instead, she received a thoughtful discourse on property rights that most adults never experience. "Adam believes children's questions should be answered honestly and completely," Zoe explained. "He says curiosity is sacred and should never be discouraged, especially in girls who are so often told not to ask too much." "He's an extraordinary man," Frances observed. "You both are creating something profound here. It extends beyond your family, beyond even Promise Creek. The articles I've written about your school and community have generated interest throughout the territory." The recognition Frances spoke of manifested in increasingly tangible ways as the years passed. By 1885, Zoe had been invited to speak at educational conferences in Denver and had published articles on educational philosophy in several respected journals. The Promise Creek School became a model, studied by other communities looking to improve their educational offerings. Adam's innovative approach to cooperative ranch management also gained attention. The alliance of small ranches he oversaw successfully competed with larger operations, proving that independent ranchers could thrive if they combined certain resources while maintaining their autonomy. Their children grew in this atmosphere of intellectual curiosity and community engagement. Elizabeth, thoughtful and articulate like her mother, developed a passion for literature and history. Michael, quieter but equally determined, showed an affinity for the practical aspects of ranch life, combined with his father's interest in fair systems of governance. In 1886, with both children now in school, Zoe and Adam embarked on their most ambitious project yet. Using profits from the ranching cooperative and donations from supporters throughout the territory, they established the Promise Creek Library and Meeting Hall, a public space dedicated to learning, discussion, and community decision-making. Some said Promise Creek would never amount to much. Mayor Dunkley, now an ally despite their rocky beginning, remarked at the opening ceremony. "A dusty little town off the main trails, too small to matter. But here we are, 10 years later, with a reputation for educational excellence and civic innovation that draws visitors from across the territory." He turned to where Zoe and Adam stood with their children. Much of that transformation began with a woman who refused to be silenced and a man who recognized the value of her voice. On behalf of Promise Creek, I thank you both for your vision and perseverance. Later that evening, after the celebrations had ended and their children were asleep, Adam and Zoe walked hand in hand under a sky brilliant with stars. They stopped at their favorite overlook, where they could see the lights of Promise Creek below, now a growing town rather than the struggling settlement they had first known. "Did you ever imagine this?" Adam asked, his arm around her waist. "When you stood up at that town meeting all those years ago?" Zoe leaned against him, reflecting. "Never. I was just trying to do what was right in that moment. I had no grand vision of changing a town or starting a school or building a library. And yet you did all those things." "We did," she corrected, turning to face him. "Everything that's happened here has been a partnership. Your belief in me gave me courage when mine faltered. Your willingness to build your life around my voice rather than despite it made everything else possible." Adam touched her face gently, the love in his eyes as strong as it had been a decade earlier. "Do you remember what I told you when I proposed? That I wanted a partner, not a conventional wife?" Zoe nodded. "I remember every word. It was the first time I believed I might be loved for exactly who I was, not despite it. I got more than I ever dreamed possible," Adam said softly. "A brilliant partner, a loving mother to our children, a force for change in our community. And you've never stopped challenging me, making me think, helping me grow." "Nor you me," Zoe replied. "You've never once asked me to be less than I am. Instead, you've built frameworks where my voice could reach further than I ever imagined possible." They sealed this affirmation with a kiss as profound as their first, standing beneath the vast Colorado sky that had witnessed their unlikely love story unfold a story that had transformed not just their lives, but an entire community. As they walked back to the home they had built together, both literally and figuratively, Zoe reflected on how far they had come, from the day a curious cowboy had decided to introduce himself to the town's most controversial woman. A simple act of recognition that had grown into a lifetime of partnership, purpose, and profound love. In the years that followed, Promise Creek continued to evolve, becoming known throughout Colorado Territory and beyond as a place of progressive education and civic engagement. The Irwin family remained at its heart not because they sought prominence, but because they never stopped believing in the power of voices raised in pursuit of justice and understanding. Elizabeth eventually followed in her mother's educational footsteps, attending college in the East, before returning to teach at the school Zoe had founded. Michael combined his father's ranching expertise with his mother's advocacy skills, working to ensure fair treatment for small landowners throughout the changing West. And Zoe and Adam, even as they grew older, never lost their commitment to creating spaces where every voice could be heard. Their Sunday gatherings continued for decades, evolving as new challenges and ideas emerged, but always characterized by respectful debate and genuine community. "They mocked her for speaking her mind," Francis Carter wrote in a retrospective article on Promise Creek's 30th anniversary. "But one man built a life around her voice, and together they built a community that changed what was possible in the American West. Not through gunfights or gold strikes, but through the revolutionary act of valuing women's minds and men's capacity for growth. Their love story is also the story of how change happens one voice, one listener, one community at a time.